Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm doing a series review of Mages of the Wheel by J.D. Evans. This is a political fantasy romance series that I picked up recently and finished within 1 week. I just absolutely loved it. It's not yet complete, but it has 4 books out and they are just so good. I really have been loving this series so far, and not just me. The first book in this series actually won the 2021 self-published fantasy blog off, which I think is very interesting, especially because this is very much fantasy romance. There is proper romance in this, but this series just really grabbed my heart, and I want to tell you all about why I loved it so much. So first, let me tell you what the series is about, starting with just an overview of the broader fantasy arc that connects all of the stories together. So this is a world that has elemental magic that is broken up into 6 different houses, and these are conceived of as being on a wheel where there are opposite houses across the wheel for each of the powers. So there is air magic, whose opposite is earth, there is water magic, whose opposite is fire, and there's creation magic, whose opposite is destruction, except that some generations prior, there were some mages who decided that the destruction mages were basically death magic and they didn't want them around, and they exterminated them, which led to an imbalance in the wheel and led to the creation mages also disappearing. So now we're in this world where magic is faltering because of this imbalance in the wheel, and we have people who are trying to rebalance the wheel and reintroduce those magic houses to it. And so that's kind of the broader arc of the fantasy story, but there's a lot of other things that are going on in this series. A lot of political intrigue, a lot of war between countries, a lot of social issues and unrest within countries, all of these sorts of things. And for each story, there's also a romance. So let me tell you about the books in the series so far. So these books are each romance novels. They very much follow the arc of a couple, but the series as a whole follows this broader fantasy arc. So far, there are 3 main books in this series, and there are going to be 3 more. Plus, there is a prequel, and Evans has said she might also do some other side novels. The first book in this story is Reign and Ruin. This is about the Princess Sultana of the Tamar Empire, and this is sort of the center of magic in this world. And she is trying very hard to deal with some really difficult political situations at home because she sees there's a lot of problems on the horizon, especially from the Republic, which is kind of a foreign entity that might be thinking about invading them, and she wants to build ties to another empire that is a little bit not on good terms with her own, in order to strengthen their power. So she reaches out to that empire, and a prince from that empire comes, and they're trying to politically work to build an alliance between their countries, but also very much falling for each other, even though politically that is not going to work. So that is their story of coming together. The next book is Storm and Shield, which follows the captain of the palace guard, who is an earth mage and somebody who's very much all about order and following rules and doing what is needed, but he's struggling because there is a huge influx of refugees into the city from a neighboring civil war, and that is causing a lot of unrest. It's very hard to deal with that. His forces are stretched thin. And one of these refugees is a woman who is very wily and very much does not respect order or authority at all, and is basically a spy. And so he is kind of pitting his wits against her, but she is so strong, and he is very, attracted to both her fighting prowess as well as her humor and her playfulness, and really it's an opposites attract story. Next is Siren Scion. This is about a rich merchant who really wants to secure her place in society in Tamar. And in order to do this, she basically goes on a quest for the sake of the palace to the Republic a little bit undercover because they have heard that there might be some creation mages, one of the houses that disappeared, that are kind of in hiding and maybe persecuted in this land. And so she goes to try to find them, to bring them back so that they can work on rebalancing the wheel. And in doing so, she gets help from a very disreputable character who is a gambler and a thief and all sorts of other things, but he has connections to this underworld where she might be able to figure out what's going on and reach these creation mages. This is very much a story of somebody who is looking for power and security and finds herself very much attracted to this guy who is none of those things. And then the prequel is Wind and Wildfire. This is basically the backstory of the parents of the heroine, the Princess Sultana from Reign and Ruin. So Evans has said that this is a standalone and you can read it in whatever order you like, but has recommended reading it after Reign and Ruin, and I very much agree with that. This also provides some backstory for the main villain, the Grand Vizier, that is throughout the series. So this is the story of the Prince Sultan, who is a very powerful wind mage. He is somebody who also has a very special ability. He's a veridor, which means that he can see inside of people's minds, but it's something that is very traumatic for the person who has this done to them as well as for him, and he's struggling with the effects of his magic on himself. And so he decides that he's going to try to get some help from an instructor at the Magic University who is known for her ability to both control finely magic as well as to instruct others. But they find themselves, despite their incredibly different social statuses, very much attracted to one another. So those are all of the books that are out so far, and I do want to mention that there is quite a bit of heavy content in these, especially things like child abuse and trauma and really some very difficult topics. So there are content warnings down in the description box, and check those out if you think you would like to see them. So now let me tell you about what I loved so much about this series, what it was doing that just gripped me so much that I finished the whole thing in just a week. First is the world building. I love the world building in this. I think that if you're a fan of a series like The Wheel of Time, this sort of world is going to work for you because it is very much multicultural, pulling from a lot of different, interesting, real world things and remixing them in interesting ways. So there's huge influences of the Ottoman Empire on Tamar, the main kind of culture that we're following, but there's also influences of the Roman Republic as well as many other things, and you can see that in the differences between these different countries and a lot of their languages and their customs and all sorts of things. And I think that the world building in this is very, very rich. Tamar especially, we get so much about the customs, about the religious practices, about the way that people interact, their daily habits. There's a ton in this of food, lots of like coffee and hummus and all sorts of wonderful, Ottoman style of things. There's also just the clothing that they wear, the kaftans and the salvar and all of these sorts of things. There's so much about this that feels very, very rich in the world building and very intricate. And there's such differences between each of these countries. So for example, the Republic, which is very much modeled on the Roman Republic, we have senators and we have also slaves. Slavery is a big storyline in this as well. Whereas in Tamar, in the Ottoman Republic, they have outlawed slavery and they rely on magic rather than relying on guns and science and things like that. So there's quite a few differences between the cultures, and I just love the way that all of it feels very vivid and very immersive. The politics were also another aspect of this that I love. This is very much political fantasy. Politics play a huge part, not just in terms of the way that the world is built, but also in terms of the plot. This is really a political fantasy, and a lot of time is devoted to these political issues. And we've got all kinds of political issues. So we do have political issues in terms of tensions between countries. We've got a lot of issues of espionage, a lot of issues of sort of different differences in how these different countries are run and how they interact with each other, how they build alliances, the way that they are invading each other, these sorts of things. So there's huge amounts of politics between countries, but a lot of the politics that we're looking at are internal to the country. So there's a huge amount of focus on political intrigue in terms of different factions within the government that are each trying to vie for control and what their goals are, what their vision for the future is. We have many of our characters who are involved politically and trying to make change politically within their governments, but fighting a lot of resistance. There's many people who are strongly believing in sort of this authoritarian type of control or very classist type of control. Related to that, we have many social issues that are discussed in this. There is a ton about classism, about sexism, and many of our characters who are fighting against that and trying to, upset these systems that powerful people have put in control, and trying to make sure that those who are poor or those who are not noble have opportunities and have a lot of access to things. So that's like a big part of this, as well as because slavery comes up in this, there is a lot of just discussion of power and control and the way that people are subjugated. So really, there's so much in this series that is talking about politics that I find fascinating. I also really loved the magic in this. The elemental magic is so fun. So because each of these houses has different magic, and the magic sort of is expressed in different way by different people, even though there's much similarity across people within a single house, it's really fascinating to see all the different types of magic. And within each of these houses, there's not just a type of magic that they have control over, but there's also often like personality traits that are very associated with that house. So for example, fire is really associated with passion and anger, and air is really associated with logic and these sorts of things. So each of the houses has these personality traits that tend to be associated, although not every person within those houses has exactly those traits. It's just a common thing that happens. And so just seeing that kind of world building in the way that the magic is related to the people, and also seeing the different levels of magic. So there's different kind of rankings of magic depending on how you are able to use your magic. If you have to use sigils, for example, versus if you can do it through just will alone, that kind of thing. And we also follow some characters that have some really strong magic that manifests differently than most other people. And so just seeing the way that their magic manifests, these stories are just so full of magic. And it's also very integral to the relationships of most of these characters, the way that their magic manifests, how they're dealing with that. Sometimes the magic is almost too much to control, or they're afraid of their magic. And so I just love how central to these relationships and to the story all of this magic is. And then there is the romance, and the romance really is the heart of each of these books. So each individual book very much does follow a romance story arc, but I think what's so fascinating about this series is because it is a political fantasy, there's so much else going on that adds a really interesting dynamic to that romance. So often in things like contemporary romance, we have things like miscommunication or these sorts of things that are keeping our characters apart. But in this, there are real, very big present political issues that are generally keeping them apart. And so for most of each story, we have our characters very much starting to like each other and yearn for each other, but really not be able to come together at all because of all of these different political issues that are keeping them apart. And so that aspect, I think, works really interestingly, where the characters, in order to come together, have to overcome some pretty big issues in their world, as well as almost always the characters are dealing with some internal personal issues of trauma. Lots of these characters have gone through trauma, issues of making a decision about how they want to lead their lives, especially if it requires quite a different choice in terms of politics or in terms of what they're doing with their power, and just kind of deciding that that relationship is worth it for them. And so that means that there is so much sexual tension for these characters, where they're coming together constantly trying to accomplish these, political plot-based goals, and knowing that it's not okay to be together, but really wanting to be. So there's a lot of yearning. And when they finally do come together, the scenes are very, very steamy. And there are proper sex scenes in this book. So I think that if you're not a romance reader, this will be rather explicit for you. But if you are a romance reader, I think that this is a lot less high heat than many other romance novels, because there's only a few sex scenes in each novel. But I think that the yearning, that kind of sexual tension is just off the charts. So I thought it was just fantastic in terms of the heat of the novel. I think also just the balance between fantasy and romance works so perfectly for me. But if you're looking for pure romance or pure fantasy, it's just not going to be the right fit for you. This really is 50-50 fantasy and romance. And so half of the story is devoted very much to these political issues and the plot and the magic and everything that's happening there. And then half of it very much is the romance and the couple coming together and their relationship, and their also kind of personal internal struggles as they work through those. But because I love both of these genres so much, that worked so perfectly for me and just melded together in such an engrossing way. I think also that one of the things that has made this series so engaging for me is perhaps something that might not work for every reader, which is that it's sort of traditional and straightforward in a lot of ways. We have a lot of the kind of magic and world building is stuff you've probably, sort of seen before in other series, even if it's done in a slightly different way here. And we've got these bad guys who are bad. They are bad people. They are out to hurt people. They're out for power. They're not good guys at all. So there's not very much nuance when we're talking about the baddies. And then the good guys are all really good. So almost every good guy in this is a white knight. So almost all of the characters are fighting very hard for social justice, for change, often from a position of privilege, as a note. And I think that can sometimes be a little simple in terms of the way that it is approached, but I just really like being able to root for the good guys, so I think that worked really well. And we do have some definitely character complexity in terms of all of the heroes and heroines are people who, let's call them rusty white knights, where often on the outside there's quite a bit of things that are difficult about them, or parts where they are not doing necessarily what's perfect, but all of them on the inside are really, really good-hearted and trying very hard to make social change. So I think that if you're looking for anything like, grittiness or grimness, you're not going to get that in this series. This is very much good guys fighting the good fight. And I think that is part of what makes this just so engaging and so lovely for me to read, even though it really does touch on quite a lot of heavier content in terms of trauma for the characters. So yeah, it's just that beautiful blend of fantasy and romance for me. Okay, so those are all of my thoughts on this series so far. I think it is just such a wonderful series. I'm so into it. It's really hard to bring my head out of the series now that I've run out of books, but I am so excited for the ones that are coming. And I know that Evans is working on them. She's got titles for them. They are coming, but I want them now. So yeah, if you are like me and you love political fantasy and you love romance, this is just so good and just such a fun world to be in. I really, really loved these. If you guys have read any of these, if you're interested in them, if you have other thoughts, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.